Good morning. My name is David Rayla. I'm a hearing officer for San Francisco Public Works. Cerise Waders is the clerk of this hearing. This hearing is being recorded and a sign-in sheet is on the table on the front of the room. Please be sure to sign in for our records and so that if necessary, we can contact you in the future regarding the item that you're here for. This public hearing is held to consider 6 items. I'm going to list them now. Order number 201987 to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for illegal pruning of 6 trees, street trees, and illegal removal of 1 street tree in the public right-of-way adjacent to the property of 915 Minna Street. Order number 201988 to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issue for illegal pruning of 1 street tree adjacent to the property of 2447 Noriega Street. Order number 201989 consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issue for failure to protect 1 street tree adjacent to the property of 8101 Mission Street. Order number 201990 to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issue for illegal removal of 1 street tree from the public right-of-way adjacent to the property at 146 Flood Avenue. Order number 201991 to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issue for failure to obtain a billboard pruning permit and for damage for 3 street trees adjacent to the property of 331 Broadway Street. And finally, order number 201992 to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issue for an illegal removal for 1 street tree, 1 significant tree, from the property at 179 Castaneda Avenue. Everything sound familiar, right? Excellent. My job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing items, listen to your testimonies, and help our Director of Public Works make determinations. I will not be making any decisions today. Instead, I will forward the findings from this hearing and make my recommendations to the Director. It is him that will make the final determinations. When the determinations are made, the department will notify you of them. Therefore, if you want to be notified, again, please make sure to sign in. Now, the hearing will proceed as follows. I will ask Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry, to speak first and describe how the item arrived at today's hearing. Afterwards, I will take public comments, including from those that submitted written comments to the department. Then I will allow the protester to speak and answer any comments. And then lastly, any agency, including Public Works, may speak again. Each speaker will have up to 5 minutes to speak, with the exception of the initial presentation from BUF, from Bureau of Urban Forestry. The clerk will monitor the time for all speakers. When you hear the first bell, it means the speaker has 30 seconds left to speak. A louder second bell is signal that the time is up. Comments and questions should be directed to me only and not to the department or the protester. If you cannot finish your comments within the allotted time, you can submit written testimony to me by the end of this hearing or email it to the department that will then forward it to me. After all comments are completed, I will close the item. So we will now begin the hearing. Order number 20987 for 915 Minna Street, please. Hi, may I have your first and last name?
Yes, my name is Madeline Farquhar, and I'm with the Bureau of Urban Forestry. I'm an urban forestry inspector. Before we start with the first case, we usually just give a little background presentation on the fine process, how to properly prune, how to improperly prune trees, why we issue fines, and information about our tree care maintenance program, Street Tree SF, as well as a little bit of information on some tree care classes that applicants can take to reduce their fines. So Just a little background on the urban forestry ordinance, the Article 16 of the Public Works Code. It was created to protect and realize the optimum public benefits of trees and their importance as green infrastructure. Trees offer many benefits to the city, including shade, stormwater mitigation, as well as habitat, and their canopies help reduce particulate matter and also just provide beauty to our otherwise gray and built environment. The greatest threat to trees in the city, unfortunately, is us, and so trees try to thrive in tough urban conditions, but humans can often damage them by running them over or hitting them with their cars. The soil can be compacted around the trees by footsteps and construction, and unfortunately, we improperly prune them sometimes. And pruning in itself is an injury to a tree, and I'll go more into that later. Article 16 outlines the protection of trees and landscaping material. Section 808 states that it shall be unlawful for any person to intentionally, maliciously, or through gross negligence injure or destroy a street tree, and this covers significant trees and landmark trees as well. Section 806 covers the removal of street trees, and just to let everyone know, it is required to have a removal permit to remove a street tree or a significant tree. And also, when we grant a tree removal permit, it shall be required that a street tree or trees of equivalent replacement value to the one removed be planted in place of the removed tree, or we impose an in lieu fee for that if they cannot plant due to utilities or other things like that. Just a little bit about construction work. Protection of trees is required during any construction that it happens under the drip line of a street tree or a significant or landmark tree, or any other publicly owned property. Said trees shall be adequately protected. If any construction works results in the injury or damage to such trees, the responsible parties may be subject to a fine. This is just a quick definition of what it means to injure a tree or an injury. It's an act which harms or damages a tree, including but not limited to impact, cutting, carving, painting, transplanting, or knocking over. It includes but not limited to, attaching things like ropes, wires, nails, and advertising posters to trees. You could go on with that if anybody has any questions. And the next part of this presentation, we just try to give a little bit of education of what we're looking for when we're kind of patrolling our zones, looking out for injuries to trees, and just best management practices for tree pruning in general. We try, whenever we get called out for a service request or a complaint about an injury to a tree, to assess the damage by seeing if more than 25% of the canopy has been removed. If you do that on a regular basis, trees will often become stressed out and they can just be more prone to disease and decay. You kind of just depleting the energy of the tree over and over again. Want to make sure that the branches aren't just sheared off at the top, and I'll explain that a little bit in the next slide, and that branches aren't being taken back to other branches that are too small to feed the tree. So you want to make sure that you're bringing the main branch back to a lateral that is big enough to become the terminal branch of the tree. So it's just an overview of a very common practice we do see in the city. It's one of the most detrimental practices in our industry, unfortunately. It's called topping, and it basically means that people are indiscriminately removing terminal branches back to a stub, or like I said, a branch too small to maintain the health of the tree. Although every species reacts a little differently, it can lead to major structural issues, and increased need for maintenance and sometimes eventually death. Many times multiple shoots will emerge from these large stub cuts, as you can see here, and oftentimes people will look at this and say, hey, the tree is bouncing back, it's recovering, it's going to be fine. But unfortunately, whenever you make those large cuts, the tree often just pushes out a bunch of shoots immediately, and it does look vigorous, but it's kind of the tree saying, I need as much energy as possible after the majority of my canopy has been removed. So it is a stress response, unfortunately. Additionally, having multiple shoots coming out from one large cut can lead to many weakly attached branches. So you've got all these tiny little twigs coming out from the same point of attachment, which can often lead to just bad angles for branch attachments and weak attachments in general. Also, it's just unpleasant to look at. And here you can see kind of a long-term effect of topping. Again, like I said, trees don't always die from these practices, but they can cause major structural issues down the line. You can see a bunch of entangled branches that have grown kind of at the same rate because they came out at the same time. It forms what we call codominant stems, which is basically just when you have a trunk, two trunks or two branches that are very similar size attached at a very acute angle. Oftentimes these attachments will have what we call included bark, which means that there's bark in that angle of attachment and there's not any solid wood really holding the branches together. So very, very prone to breakage and splitting apart. So this is just an example of kind of what can happen over time. Even if the tree doesn't die, it presents a major maintenance issue in the future where we're going to have to come back every year to try and mitigate the hazards that it creates. This is just another example of what can happen with large stub cuts. Oftentimes the trees won't have enough energy to properly seal the wound. When that happens, there's just more time for decay to enter into those cuts and pathogens to enter through that decay. Just a quick note about pollarding. You'll see trees like this out in front of City Hall where they have the big knobbly stubs. They look like fists. It is a practice that we accept in the city. It's not the same as topping. Some species can do okay with this practice. It just depends on the species. It involves cutting off small shoots every year to create these sort of knobbly ends of the branches. It's not a practice we really love, but it is accepted in most parts of the city. Just a quick note about high voltage power lines. You'll see throughout the city lots of power lines going up and down the streets. Oftentimes people get really nervous about trees growing around lines. And just want to explain a little bit that many of the lines don't pose a major hazard. If your tree is growing around communication or low voltage lines, which are the lines at the bottom of these poles, they often don't pose any major risk, and with proper pruning, you can mitigate a lot of that risk. The main concern is high voltage power lines, which are the lines that run at the very top. They're often labeled with a yellow high voltage. They're above the transformer, and PG&E does regularly patrol to ensure that these the trees aren't coming into contact with these lines. So just a little overview of that. And just a bit about our street tree care maintenance program. Street Tree SF started out as a proposition in 2016. It was passed with nearly 80% of the vote and took effect in July of 2017. And this is just like a $19 million set aside for tree maintenance and money to fix sidewalks for tree root related damage. And it's great that we are able to have more information because of this proposition. So this is an example from the 2016 tree census. There's data that we plotted all the trees in the city, learned that we had quite a few more trees than we actually thought. And then what we've done is we've sort of put the city into a grid, and we go to the areas with the most need, with the highest number of tree hazards, and that's kind of how we've dealt with the maintenance situation for the first 3 to 5 year cycle. Since the start, we've done about 24% of the total tree maintenance needs in the city. More than 30,000 trees have been pruned, and more than 3,000 at-risk trees have been removed. You can go to streettreesf.org and learn more about our pruning schedule, and look up your address and see when we're going to be in the area. And this is just an example of the outreach information that is usually put on the door a couple months before the actual pruning goes through. We tell folks that you don't have to prune your tree anymore. It's not required. We'll take care of that maintenance. And just a little bit about our tree care class. When attended, a reduction of the fine issued can actually be reduced, and we go over tree care, proper pruning, maintenance. We review the tree care program and how you don't have to prune trees anymore. And the class fee is $197. So if anybody's interested in that, they just come to us and let us know. So, to the first order, 915 Minna Street. It's consider appeal from the property owner for a fine issued for illegal pruning of 6 street trees and an illegal removal of 1 street tree in the public right-of-way. So this case, the site originally came to us with a removal permit back in 2017. Our inspectors went out to review the trees and found they were in healthy and sustainable conditions, so the permit was denied. I believe this was at the beginning of the construction project, so just trying to tick all the boxes. Whenever they submitted that application, they also submitted a checklist for tree planting and protection, which does direct applicants to view Article 16, explaining what constitutes damage to a street tree. So this is just an overview of what the trees looked like back in 2017 when there was an inspection done for a removal permit application. So healthy olives, vigorous canopy, doing pretty well. And this is what the trees look like when we received a service request and after pruning was done. So you see they've just removed a lot of the canopy, nearly 100% of the healthy foliage. And unfortunately, tree 2 in the series that we label with the flow of traffic was removed illegally. So that is why we issued the fine.
So you have a picture of the removed tree?
Yes.
Or can you point that out?
Yes, the removed tree is tree 2 on the right. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, do we have someone from, oh, thank you. Can I have your first and last name?
Hello, Selina Yüksel.
Thank you.
So after pruning, we now can see trees appear to have responded well, actually, and have new growth emerging from multiple locations along the trunk. So we bring out the certified arborist for trees to check, and he, sorry. He wrote a letter about the tree's health. I can just read that to you. The trees were pruned with heading cuts. From photographs, the trees appear to have been reduced to approximately half their previous height. Several of the trees have a few dead branches or small branches broken by vehicles, but for the most part of all 6 trees have fairly full emerging foliage. Despite the over-pruning, the trees appear to have responded well and have new growth emerging from multiple locations, especially near the heading cuts. As only 8 months have elapsed since the pruning was performed, the increase in foliage shows that the trees are still in good health and should continue to develop their branches and foliage. I recommend that the trees be left alone for at least 1 additional year to recapture energy. At that time, I recommend that structural pruning to be performed in an effort to reduce the competition amongst the branches for apical dominance. This will promote better branch structure and stronger branch unions. Directional pruning should also be performed, promoting a more vertical growth form. So this is the letter we got from our arborist, and the removal of 1 tree. So we actually have an approval from Urban Forest for a removal, but I will show that later. I can see that here. Not here, not now. Yeah, at this moment, the trees shown some, they look healthy. They look better than they look in that picture in May. Right now, they have grown, and they're getting bigger in size. And our arborist is saying that the trees are healthy now, and they're going to grow back to their full glory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so just to recap a second, you acknowledge that the trees were pruned excessively, correct? But your main point is that these trees are going to bounce back. So there is no permanent damage, or I mean, there's mitigated damages. Is that what you're trying to say?
Here it says in the fine letter, it says the trees are pruned repeatedly and over pruned. So we just pruned the trees once, and now they're growing back. And our arborist is saying that could be less pruning for sure, but they are still healthy. They bounce back. Yeah.
Okay. And for the removed tree, you said you have a permit.
Yes, I have an email chain saying that we can remove the tree number 3. So I don't know if there was a misunderstanding then or complication in that situation.
Yeah. Please make sure that I receive a copy of that permit.
Yes.
Please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there any public comment from the public regarding this item? Then any agency would like to speak? Then I have a question for BUF, Bureau of Urban Forestry. So we just heard from a letter from a certified arborist that the damage here doesn't appear to be a death sentence to these trees, or there is a possibility for recovery here. What is the agency opinion on these particular trees with these particular cuts?
Yeah. So it's always species specific. Olives in general, I wouldn't say that they always perform terribly after topping cuts. It is a tree that has been traditionally pruned in that way for like olive production, things like that. However, these trees are street trees and they're not in an orchard environment. So even though the trees are bouncing back, we often see that very typically, and it is a stress response. So the trees could continue to live for many years, but because their energy has been depleted at least once, it can introduce decay like I described in the earlier presentation. Our main concern here is mainly because it's a narrow sidewalk, it's a street tree, people are walking, it's a public right-of-way, and these topping cuts over time will create those weakly attached branches. However, it is great that the arborist recommended restoration pruning, so to let it grow out and try to mitigate the structural damage. However, it was an injury to a tree, or to 6 trees, and we feel that it was egregious enough to issue a fine.
I understand. So these 3 trees are under the maintenance plan, right?
Yes.
So the future maintenance or the plan for restoration will fall not on the owner or the project sponsor, will fall on the city, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless the property owner decides to hire their own certified arborist to do that. We actually do allow folks to prune trees as long as they clear it with us first. So you don't technically need like an official permit or anything like that, but people can call Urban Forestry or get in contact with us and have their arborist contact us with their work plan. So that's when we give the approval to the arborist to actually do the work. So folks are free to actually prune their own trees, and they can even opt out of our official program, but they have to get approval through us.
Right, and imagine the approval regards a proper, 5-year plan, or something that is not done once, but it's over time.
For every actually pruning event, we would need to reapprove the work plan. So it's not something where they would come up and say, we're going to do this from now on. We usually try to do it for every event of pruning.
Okay, thank you. May I have the protester again, just for a question real quick. I'm sorry, it wasn't clear earlier, but are you representing the owner or the construction?
Yes, owner.
Oh, the owner, okay, great. So do you think that this is something that the property owner will be amenable to, hiring their own arborist, submitting these kind of permits, trying to undo the damage? Is this something that you guys...
Yeah, well, our owner is already a farmer, so he's really caring about this situation. So that's why we are working with other arborists for our other projects. So we can just hire another or the same arborist for this situation. And we already got the recommendation, and we will still take care of these trees. Our office is on that neighborhood already, so we are already taking care of them.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, the last question for me is, assuming you have that permit for the removal of that tree, I'm guessing the tree was in the way of what, the driveway or
Yes, yeah.
entry point, right? Where do you plant the required replacement tree? Typically, for removing a tree, you're required to plant another tree unless it's physically impossible, right?
Yeah, I wasn't working with this company at the time, but as I know that the sidewalk was not physically,
Wide enough?
wide enough, deep enough for a new plant.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to see the permit then, because the information should be there.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Is there any other comment from anybody regarding this item? If not, I will close it and move to the next order, which is for 2447 Noriega Street. Who's here for Noriega Street? Thank you.
Madeline Farquhar, Urban Forestry, is to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for illegal pruning of one street tree. The inspector originally visited this site due to a service request, just complaining about the damage to the street tree. We typically find that the adjacent property owner is usually the party responsible for the damage, and we had reason to believe that the tenant at this property had interests in removing and pruning the trees. In 2017, the tenant applied for a removal permit and was denied. Additionally, there have been service requests submitted by this tenant explaining that the tree was blocking the business signage, and that they would like to have it removed and replaced with a smaller tree. This is just some photos from January 2014 from a past inspection before the tree was pruned. December 2016, another photo of the tree before it was pruned. And this is September 2018, after the tree was topped. And this is when the service request came in. So again, like I said, while we typically find that it's the adjacent property owner or tenant who's responsible, we're definitely willing to consider evidence that suggests otherwise.
Sure. Quick question.
Yes.
So it sounded like the tenant or the property owner was interested in the having this tree taken care of, pruned, right?
Yes.
Multiple requests, as you mentioned. Has these requests been acted upon? Have they been approved? Have this tree been maintained by the city as requested?
Yeah, I don't believe this tree has been pruned since the passage of Proposition E or Street Tree SF took in effect in 2017. Usually we'll wait until the area is regular scheduled maintenance, so we have them all kind of scheduled out for a certain year, and I don't believe that this area has been pruned yet, so we're kind of just waiting in line to get to that area. For this particular reasoning for trying to uncover the business signage, or I do see some wires here, perhaps that was causing concern. Communication lines, low voltage. We can't expedite pruning, unfortunately, for those particular situations because they're not considered hazardous. So we kind of just try to prioritize where we can move out of schedule and prune one by one, in situations where, trees are really like damaging a building, or there are broken branches that are, kind of hanging and creating a hazardous situation. So we go case by case, and usually we can't expedite for situations like this. I do believe that the removal permit that was submitted, or it was in 2017, it was denied. So we also communicated that we weren't able to approve that request since the tree
Okay.
was healthy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there any public comment for this item? Protester, can I have your first and last name, please?
Hi, my name is Winnie.
I'm sorry, could you speak more into the microphone? Oh, you can move it. There we go.
Hi, my name is Winnie Chung. I'm the tenant at 2447 Noriega Street. So back in 2014, we hired a arborist to prune the tree. We have all the invoices with us. And then in 2017, I believe, we our arborist submitted paperwork to remove the tree, which was denied. But a month later, in May, we actually got the arborist to prune the tree. So we were not the ones that did this pruning to this illegal pruning. We didn't do it. So, because we know the laws and regulations not to damage a tree. We always got someone else to do it, like an arborist that is licensed to do it. And then, yeah, that's all I have to say. Because in 2014 we pruned it once. In 2017 we pruned it once, so we know the procedure and all the process and stuff. And we weren't the ones that did this to the tree.
Okay, so do you have a copy of the receipts? Or
Yeah, I
did
have
you
all the
submit it to the
receipts with
public?
us.
Oh, would you like to submit it to me? These are copies, they are not your
Yeah,
original,
these are-
right? Okay, great.
Yeah, these are copies. We even have the request to submit to remove the tree, the permits that our arborist did for us, and we paid for it too. And then this is another estimate for removal and then replanting the tree if it does go through with the city, but it didn't. So a month later, in May 2017, we had a paid invoice for pruning the tree. So we didn't damage the tree, but this one was not us.
So,
And then this one was in 2014.
okay. So, when you received the notice of the violation or the fine, did you contact the arborist that you hired?
I'm sorry, what was that?
When you received the notice, right, that you've been fined, or that you've been fined, did you contact the arborist that actually, did the work?
Oh, no, I didn't contact them. I didn't know who did that, so I didn't.
I'm sorry, I'm confused then. I thought you hired an arborist.
Yeah, we hired an arborist in 2014 once to prune a tree.
Okay.
We hired one in 2017
17,
to
right.
prune a tree.
Uh-huh.
And then this was in 2018.
2018, somebody.
Somebody did it. We don't know who it is.
Somebody.
But it wasn't us because we know we need to hire arborists for our city trees.
Okay, now it's a little clearer. Do you have an idea who goes around trimming trees?
I have no idea, but we know that some people are complaining about the birds and the bugs that's coming out from the middle of the tree.
Is there a residence at this location, or is just a business? Are there residences very close to it? Someone that has a stake.
It's just
for-
right behind us. There's residents behind us.
right behind you, right, on the other side of the
Yeah,
block.
on the other side.
So that would not be the primary entrance for.
It's not the primary entrance.
Okay. What I'm trying to establish is,
And back in September 2018, we took a whole month off for vacation, and we do have evidence from our accountant that we didn't do any payrolls during the whole month. And we
okay.
have other employees that can state that we were not open for business, so we weren't even here that month.
So someone waited until you were gone to.
Yeah, someone probably waited until we were gone to do it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Can I have Buff at the podium, I guess? Okay, so so my first question is, assuming we don't know who trimmed the tree, where does the fine go, right? Or to whom, I should say.
Yeah, in these situations, I don't have a ton of experience where we don't know exactly who has done the tree trimming. So I think in my experience, it's usually up to the director to make the discernment. But there are, I mean, like Winnie said, other possibilities that it could have not been the tenant or the property owner. So unfortunately, in those situations where it's just kind of word of mouth, I'm not exactly sure how it's resolved. I'd have to go back and ask, sorry.
No. What it's just meaning the property owner is the one that receives by default, receives the fine.
Yes.
But let's say, not to say that this is the case, but let's say that the property owner does hire a certified, licensed, bonded arborist, and the arborist does a crappy job, say chop the tree in half or whatever, not that far, but does the fine still goes to the property owner, or do you give it to the contractor, to the arborist?
It's usually directly to the property owner. In these cases, whenever a contractor acted without their permission or something like that, it's kind of treated as a third-party dispute between the property owner and the contractor. That's usually what we recommend folks do, is go to them first and say, hey, what was going on? Why did you do this? You usually do it correctly, or whatever the case is. We usually have them kind of deal with their contractor first to get the full picture. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. So basically, if I was the owner, I would try to bounce this back to whoever did the work. Again, not saying this is the case because I don't know who did it, but okay. Thank you. Do I have any additional comments for this item? Okay, this was for Noriega Street. Next item is, one second, I believe it's Mission. Lost my agenda for a second.
Yeah. This
Yes.
particular item has actually been withdrawn by the applicant, so their appeal has been completely withdrawn from the process. So I believe the next step is that they're going to actually just pay the fine for their failure to protect during construction.
Okay, that makes it easier. So let's jump, unless anybody has a comment on this. 1801 Mission Street. Oh, yes.
It's not regarding this. Are we?
You're allowed to go, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Your item is finished, so whoever item is finished can go anytime. Yes, you will receive you receive a communication from BUF with the results of this recommendation. So, thank you. Yeah, so you have a contact with BUF, I believe. Right. So they will be my middleman. So you give everything to them, and I will receive a copy. I'll make sure that. You can say it to, yeah, Cerise, would you please give her a hand? Sorry about this, guys. So I'll close 1801 Mission Street item, which is order number 201-989, and move over to 146 Flood Avenue. May I have Buff make his presentation, please? First and last name.
Yes, my name's Madeline Farquhar. I'm with Urban Forestry. This is to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for illegal removal of one street tree from the public right-of-way. Originally, this site also came to us through a service request where somebody was just reporting that the tree had been removed. The property owner had concern that the tree was falling and failing into the driveway, but unfortunately, we can't find any evidence that we were contacted about this particular concern. And then after reviewing photos from past Google Maps images, it appears that the lean of the tree has been stable for many years. So that just means like we looked at, past Google images captures and saw that the lean on the tree has been fairly similar throughout the years. So it's not actively falling. The lean hasn't increased. So here's December 2017. And this is just recently where the tree looks like it had to be cut and then was paved over in the sidewalk.
Okay, so the property owner, you said the property owner contacted Buff for a removal application?
No,
or
it
maintenance?
actually just, I believe it came to our inspector just through a service request. So it was kind of somebody on the block had said, the tree has been removed here.
Oh,
Please
okay, now,
investigate,
yeah, I understand now.
something like that. And that's when the inspector came out and just discovered the tree had been removed and the spot had been paved. So that is why the fine was issued.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone here for flood? Oh, hi. May I have your first and last name, please?
My name is Sally Connect. I live at 146 Flood Avenue. And 20 years ago, when I planted that tree and the other pear tree next to it with Friends of the Urban Forest, it was drilled into our brains that the city was not responsible in any way for those trees and that we were. So that was my presumption 20 years ago, that city would have nothing to do with it. We were responsible for anything to do with those trees. I wanted those trees. I planted those trees myself. And the one tree that we did remove was tilting over very badly, always. It was about half the size of the other tree, which the other tree is doing great. That tree never did well. It was hit numerous times by cars and trucks trying to park on that
Driveway?
right on that sidewalk there, and it just never, ever did well. It was not my intention to, go out and remove the tree illegally or anything like that, but it did badly. It'd been hit numerous times. It was hard getting my truck in. It was hard, my contractor had a hard time getting it in. And, I just think the fine is outrageous, to be perfectly honest. And for one thing, I was sent this email and they don't even have the right spot marked on this. They put in green with a little X there. It's not even the right spot where the tree was. So if they can't even get that right, I don't know. It's just very discerning to me that they would do such a fine. I took care of the trees. I did the best I could, but that one tree never did well because it was constantly being hit. And it was bending over and bending over and bending over. And I just think the fine is outrageous. And if they can't even get the right spot on the thing that they're going to show me where the tree was not even here where they marked. It was right next over here, not here. Tree was there, not here.
I'm going to do it.
Yeah, 1 second.
And that's all I have to say.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, it looks like a mistake.
Okay, that's not where the tree was. The tree was over there.
Yeah, right in there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can I have Buff? Oh, I'm sorry. Are you speaking in support of the?
Yes. My name is Mark Carrillo. I'm just, I can just attest to the fact that the tree had been hit. The pole that keeps them upright has been broken several times over the years. I even replaced it one time approximately 8 or 10 years ago. Thus, the tree was not allowed to grow to the proper height for its canopy. So every time I pulled my truck in the driveway, I either broke a couple branches off or, you know, had an issue like that, scratching the paint on my truck and whatnot. So for what it's worth, the tree has never been right from the beginning, that's all.
Okay. May I ask the property owner a question? This is a very, very quick question. Have you considered replacing the tree instead of paving over?
I did, but
Yeah.
it did so poorly there, and it was hit so many times that I was absolutely not comfortable with putting another tree there, because to me, with people parking there, and I see my neighbor, that big white truck, he a lot of times parks right there, it was constantly being hit. And I don't see, in that little spot right there, and it's not the green one, it's the one over, yeah, I'm not comfortable with another tree being planted there if it's just going to get hurt again. And I wanted those trees desperately, and I wanted two, you know, one on each side of my house to be even. And the other pear tree is done phenomenally, and this one, the round of the tree was about half the size of the other pear tree. They were both planted on the same day, you know, so I'm not comfortable with planting another tree there.
Okay, what
And I
about?
filled it in because I didn't want anybody to get hurt walking on the sidewalk with a big hole, which I know, being born and raised here, that happens. So that's why we filled it in.
What about potentially, right? Planting one where the green X is.
Well, that's right next to the place where the other ones constantly got hit, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, just for my future
It's
reference.
possible, I guess.
Okay, that's all.
Okay.
Thank you. Quick question for Buff, please.
It's Madeline Farquhar, Urban Forestry.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm familiar with the knowledge that at one point, not that long ago, these trees were a responsibility of the property owner, right? Whether they want it or not. And then Prop E, I believe it was, transferred the responsibility back to the city. But it was my understanding that even then, even though the trees are a responsibility of the property owner, that the welfare of the trees are still safeguarded by the city. In other words, you can plant a tree, you can grow a tree, you can trim a tree, but if you damage it, you still get fined. Would that be correct?
That's correct. And we're totally sympathetic to how, there was a sea change, and there's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years, so it can be confusing. However, you're correct in saying that even before the city took back responsibility for street trees, you're still required to obtain a permit to remove trees, as well as, I'm not sure about the pruning actually, but I do know that removal required a permit.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment regarding this item? Okay, then we'll move forward and close this item for 146 Flood Avenue and move to Broadway Street. Is anybody here for Broadway Street? Okay, may I have Buff make his presentation real quick, please?
Okay. This was to consider an appeal from the property owner for a fine issued for failure to obtain billboard pruning permit and for damage to 3 street trees. This just covers a section of Article 16 that outlines that major maintenance of street trees adjacent to general advertising signs does require a permit. So adjacent, I think, means just within 150 feet. So it does require a permit to actually prune those trees and deal with the visibility of the signage. Just a little history of the site. I believe back in 2015, 2016, there were drive-by inspections conducted with Arborwell, with one of our inspectors for multiple billboard pruning sites in this neighborhood. This particular property was included in those, so it's kind of on our radar anyway. And then Outfront Media, the organization dealing with this billboard, they have submitted billboard pruning permits in the past, and they've always been really open with communication and are aware of the ordinance and what's required with that. So I'm going to go back to that letter in just a second. This is just a photo of the trees as they looked in May 2019. So you can see that 100% of their canopy has been removed. I think this sign, you can see where the billboard is. And so just a case of topping or heading cuts.
I'm sorry, could you point out the billboard? I must have blind.
Which one, sorry?
The billboard?
Oh, yeah, sorry. It's right to the right of the Trans-American Pyramid. It's outlined in yellow. It's above. It's kind of on that.
Oh, okay.
facing.
Okay,
I know
yeah,
it's not like a giant billboard,
Yeah,
but
okay.
yeah, that's where it is. And we have had permits in the past pulled for this particular building for pruning the trees.
Oh, this is the first time I see it. A billboard pruning permit. Yeah, I'm guessing it is so that you can actually see the billboard.
Yeah, it's mainly for visibility. So it usually requires more extensive pruning.
Right.
So that's why we kind of require an official permit to be pulled so that we can discuss and have it on record that it's been done that way, just to have it all out there. So and then we got a letter from, I believe, the tenant in August of 2017. This was after we had maintenance of the street trees given over to us. So it made sense that they were sending us a letter about the desire to either remove or drastically prune the trees. They were also worried about just general detritus gathering around the trees, and we responded saying that general upkeep of the sidewalk is the responsibility of the property owner, and that we wouldn't be able to approve removal of trees. And I'm assuming at that point we gave them the general spiel about how we're pruning the city in a grid schedule, so they would probably just likely have to wait until their time was up. I do believe this area has been officially pruned now by us, but it was before May of 2019. So I just also wanted to show pictures of what the trees look like now. So they have leafed out. They have sent out a lot of shoots. And like I was talking about earlier, this is a species that has been historically pollarded. So it's not going to react in the same way as like an evergreen tree would if you were to remove the entirety of its canopy. However, if you do continue to do this on a regular basis without following the exact practices of pollarding, which is a very maintenance intensive, every year you're going to have to hit the tree, it can cause a lot of damage to the tree over time. It can reduce its energy stores and just stress it out over time. And these particular trees, the inspector told me, were not planted with the intention of pollarding. They were planted as part of a streetscape to become large, mature platanus trees. So it's just taking it out of the design and reducing the benefits these trees can offer by topping them.
Okay, sorry. I don't have the protest letter with me. Are they protesting at all, or?
I believe it was appealed by Outfront, if I'm not mistaken. I would have to confirm that with the inspector for this case.
Yeah. Well, in any regards, they're not here. So. Right, thank you. I'm assuming there's nobody who would like to speak on this item, so I will close it and move to the final item, which is Castaneda.
This is to consider an appeal for the property owner for the fine issued for illegal removal of one significant tree from the property of 175 Castaneda Avenue. So this is the tree. This case came to us originally through our removal permit process. So originally, Rock and Rose, a landscape company in the city, applied for tree removal on the owner's behalf, stating that this tree was significant. And just an example or a definition of what that means, significant trees are within 10 feet of the public right-of-way, and they meet one of three size requirements. This one particularly met the size requirement for diameter, so DBH, diameter at breast height, which was well over 12 inches, which is what the size requirement is. Whenever they submitted this removal permit, they also submitted a site plan just showing to scale the bird's eye view of what was going to happen on the property. They showed on this plan that the center of the trunk was 9.5 feet from the public right-of-way. And it's important to know that if any portion of the trunk is within 10 feet, so any portion of the trunk, not just the center, then we consider it a significant tree. Whenever the removal permit was applied for, the inspector came out and did an evaluation of the tree's health. At that time determined that it was, in sustainable condition, so communicated to Rock and Rose that the tree would be a denial. The inspector appraised the value of the tree at that time, so the monetary value of the tree, and it wasn't in preparation to issue a fine because nothing had happened at that point. It was in preparation for the possibility that the property owner would appeal the denial. So just getting ready for that kind of hearing process. So although no formal denial was issued, the application was also not officially withdrawn. And I just wanted to show a couple pictures. These are side by side of the before and after of the tree removal. Just for some context, you can see in the little, or for a point of reference, you can see in the little green, this is really far away, so it might be better to see it after this. You can see these branch crotches that you can kind of have as a point of reference for where these measurements were taken. On the right picture, it's also hard to see, but there's a tape measure down there where 10 feet is from the public right-of-way, and then a red line kind of going straight up from there. On the right picture, we see where the tree was originally, and you can kind of see where that 10 feet is. Again, the angles aren't exactly, but there is a little bit of leeway with the measurement that was on the site plan. So the legal removal was noticed when the inspector was in the neighborhood again. So I'm not sure if it was a service request in particular, but she just noticed it was missing. So since issuing the fine, there's been a lot of dialogue about whether the tree was indeed a significant tree, and the property owner and the representative have requested that the fine be withdrawn because they believe that it was not a significant tree, so not within that 10 feet of the public right-of-way. And we do appreciate the open communication that both parties have allowed since the fine was issued, with the property owner coming in to explain and talking with the representative. We do appreciate that, but on the staff level, fines are rarely ever withdrawn because we just like to have the open process and have it out, at a hearing. So just an example of this, I believe a couple years ago, we had a situation where a tree was, we thought it was illegally removed, and it turned out a storm had taken it down. So in that case, we still didn't withdraw the fine. We just went through with the process so the hearing officer could, figure out what was going on with the whole situation. In this case, we do not believe that this particular determination was made in error and maintain that this tree was significant. And we're often called out on these cases to determine whether trees are significant, and often let folks know that when they don't fall into that category, because we don't want to kind of have to force them to go through the paperwork and relieve them of dealing with that lengthy permitting process. And we don't really want to subject people to extra paperwork if the tree doesn't meet those requirements. We know this is just up here is our field appraisal sheet where we made that the monetary value of the tree. We know the applicant has expressed concern over appraised value we have presented since the new edition of the ISA's guide for plant appraisal was out. It was released just prior to when the inspector appraisal was completed. And we really want to respect that process, so we're definitely willing to reappraise the tree with the 10th edition, and we use the 9th edition. So there will be some differentiation between the monetary value that was, calculated. So we're also willing to consider any appraisal that another arborist brings for the value of this tree, though we do usually recommend to have physically seen the tree prior to or during the appraisal. Additionally, it's not uncommon for arborists to come up with differing values. So in those cases, we usually just say to split the difference if there's a discrepancy on the values. We're pretty conservative in our appraisals for the most part. We want to be reasonable and often reduce the value according to the tree's health defects. Again, I just want to reiterate that we don't believe this decision was made in error. We do believe the tree was significant and that the property owner knew this before removal. You can see some email correspondence from Rock and Rose originally explaining they had the need to discuss this with the client, the need to pull the permit, and then also that they had discussed it with the client about filing permit, the need for it, and why that you need a permit to remove a tree. We do think this situation warrants some discussion about which exact contractor did the tree removal and why they didn't obtain a removal permit to do so. Tree work companies are usually required to know what the ordinances are in their particular municipalities where they work. So if it was a company that was not a tree work company, it would be a matter of them operating outside of their job class, which often leads to these kind of situations where tree ordinance are not properly acknowledged. In situations like this, we often recommend that the property owner direct their concerns to the contractor.
Okay, thank you. Apologies, I don't think the timer was on for this part, so I allow the protester the same amount of time.
Before the time gets started,
I'm sorry, oh yeah, absolutely.
documents I'm going to be referring to and have the projector available.
Thank you. May I have your first and last name, please?
Good morning. My name is Barry Kaplan Bonaparte. I'm the attorney representing the Nebenzals, who are the owners of 175 Castaneda, and they are both here, as is James McNair, our consulting arborist, who will be adding some additional information about the appraisal methodology that was used. I want to get into some background information that I think is pertinent in order to understand how we got here, and staff alluded to that. The Nebenzals were needing to redo their front yard in large part due to the lifting of their walkway from the tree in question, among other things. The Nebenzals are in their 80s, and it was presenting a danger to them and to their visitors. They initially hired Rock and Rose, who, based on faulty information from a designer not within their own company, submitted an application for a permit to remove the tree. This application was submitted on August 23rd, 2018, providing the reason that the tree was creating a dangerous condition with the walkway. They never got a response. They called, Rock and Rose called, on October 24th to find out what the problem was. On October 26th, they were told by Ms. Nawberry's staff that the group had been a bit overwhelmed, I'm assuming because of Proposition E, and had not been able to get to it, but that she was going to get to it that day. Again, nothing happened. On November 5th, the landscaper contacted Ms. Nawberry again, saying it's been over 10 weeks since they submitted the application and that they were not able to move forward with the project due to the delays. Instead of processing the application, Ms. Nawberry asked if the design of the walkway could be changed to avoid cutting the roots. The landscaper responded in an email dated November 8, 2018, which you have in front of you and which is on the screen there, providing in great detail all of the reasons why there was no viable design change that could alleviate the problem. He assumed at that point that the application would be granted, as they had jumped through all the hoops that were required. Staff just mentioned that the clients were copied on this email. You'll see that only the designer was copied on this email and not the client, so they were unaware of any of this going on. And actually, they came in to staff and told them that they had been unaware of what their designer was doing. Once again, there was no response forthcoming. In fact, as far as we know, there was never a response and never a decision made on the application, as just confirmed by staff, which should have been processed and should have been granted given the criteria in the ordinance pertaining to hazard trees as defined in Section 802. In the meantime, in part due to the delays in the project, the Nebenzals changed landscapers. They used Patrick Lannon for the design work. Mr. Lannon measured the tree from the edge of the sidewalk, and he determined it was 12 feet. You have in front of you Mr. Lannon's declaration, how he determined that and all the work that went into that. And this was a rough sketch he did at the time, showing that the distance from the curb of the sidewalk to the tree was 12 feet. And in fact, he calls it a dead holly because, as stated in his declaration, it was on its way out, and a full portion of it on the backside of the tree, not visible from the street, was actually dead. He checked with Forest Hill Homeowners Association to find out if there were any restrictions for removing the tree. They gave the go-ahead, indicating that neither their rules nor the city's ordinances required any special permission because of its distance. The work was performed using a professional contractor, a licensed contractor. After the work was performed, it was discovered apparently during the drive-by, just referenced by staff, that the tree had been removed. At that point, the Nebenzals received a notice of the alleged violation very recently. They checked with their landscaper, who confirmed that the tree was not a significant tree and no permit was required. And you have his full declaration there. That's Mr. Lannon. We then spoke with Daniel Westover, the surveyor who had done work out at the property a few years prior, and asked for his opinion. We gave him the information from the city, including the photos, and asked if he could verify what we were being told about the distance. You have his declaration in front of you as well, describing in detail all the work that he did, so I won't repeat that, but basically what he did was to measure from the right-of-way, which was about 1.5 inches away from the curb of the sidewalk. And I'm showing you now a photo exhibit to his declaration on the screen. And he measured from the right-of-way to the wall at the entrance of the home, because both of those things were fixed objects that existed at the time the tree was there and exist now. He came up with 24 feet. He then took the photograph of the tree when it was still standing and inserted it into his AutoCAD program and scaled it to fit the 24-foot measurement. He arrived at a measurement of the face of the trunk of the tree, 11.4 feet from the right-of-way. He also allowed for a margin of error given the potential distortion of the photography, but that margin of error was only plus or minus 0.5 feet. So in other words, the tree was somewhere between 10.9 feet and 11.9 feet from the right-of-way. And this is consistent with the landscaper's measurement of 12 feet, given that the actual right-of-way is 1.5 inches from the sidewalk curb. So if you add 1.5 inches to 11.9 feet, you get 12 feet. Problems with city measurements based on the photo that was shown to you, if you look at both those photos, and I think she alluded to the fact, were taken from different angles. And distortion from photography when taken from different angles is a very real thing, which is why the surveyor allowed for this margin of error. And so if you look at, let me just pull up that photo that they had. If you look at the placement of the trunk in each of those photos, you'll see that in the first photo, the placement of the trunk is much closer to the stairway than in the second photo where the actual trunk occurred. Now, the stairs and walkway were replaced, but I confirmed with the landscaper that they were placed in exactly the same spot and the stairs are in the same location. So this just by looking at the photo and the distortion of the angles, it looks off, like it's off by a few feet. In short, no permit was needed. Even if it had been needed, it should have been granted. Any misunderstanding as to the need for a permit or lack thereof was the result of a combination of errors, first by the first landscaper who did not have accurate information, and then by the inaction of city personnel who never processed the application and never rendered a decision. Certainly the Nebenzals should not be responsible for either of these missteps, particularly as it is clear now that the tree was not a significant tree as defined. And I would turn it over to Mr. McNair to talk about the appraisal issue.
First, I would like to ask a question real quick.
Yes.
Do you have the original survey for this property that will show where the tree stands? I don't know if that's common practice to include the three locations in surveys, but because all I've been hearing so far has been distances using photographs, and I understand the tree is gone, so but is there a more official document?
No, I looked at the original survey, and it doesn't show any of the trees or landscaping. It's basically the property lines relative to the structure itself and no tree locations.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that this
Yeah.
is the best we can do right now.
Believe me,
But,
I was hoping we would
Right.
find that. And also, they say that the plan submitted with the application shows 9.5 feet. I don't see that in the plan that was submitted with the application. Maybe somebody did some calculations or something and assumed it was to scale, but it does not say 9.5 feet in that.
in the original removal application?
Right,
Okay.
in the plan that she showed. And in fact, the application itself, if you read it, it says approximately 10 feet. It doesn't even give a precise measurement. And the Rock and Rose contractor was relying on an outside designer who gave them faulty information. So it was like third hand.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
James McNair. I'm a consulting arborist. I am a ISA certified arborist, ISA tree risk qualified assessor. I'm also qualified by American Society of Consulting Arborists for tree and plant appraisal. So that's a brand new qualification based upon the 10th edition. So, and I've done literally many hundreds of tree appraisals. So my comments here, as was mentioned, the current methodology is the 10th edition. And the original appraisal done by the Urban Forestry Department was based upon the 9th edition. And there's been significant changes in that methodology. And one of the critical ones is the fact that the location factor is no longer part of the equation. And I went back and I looked at their 9th edition appraisal approach, and then I also calculated the trunk formula technique used in the 10th edition. And going back to their appraisal, I thought it really did overvalue the tree significantly. And the issues I found is that they had a contribution rating of 75%. So I don't know how familiar you are with the appraisal processes.
Not very much.
Okay, well, it's a replacement cost method that then is depreciated by various variables.
Got it.
One's the location factor, one's the condition, and then also the species rating. Those are in the 9th edition. So anyway, the first item I noted was in the contribution rating. They had to put a rating of 75%. And for a tree to be provided, that means basically of the whole yard, the property, that one tree was providing a 75% contribution value of the landscape. And clearly, this tree was pruned down, kept constrained. It was located right next to a walkway where it was doing damage and was really a health and safety issue. But I put the rating there at 30%, which automatically would diminish, that calculation. The other was the condition rating. They had a 75% condition rating. Well, the photos I showed one, severe infestation of thrips and scale. The crown looks very sparse for English holly. And the landscaper had some photos and mentioned that there was a trunk canker on the opposite side of the tree, so that there was a dead portion in the trunk. And based upon that information, I took it down to a 30% condition rating. And so the revised calculation from their 16,100, I came up with 3,865 using the 9th edition. Now, going to the 10th edition, that'll be hard to read, but again, that contribution factor isn't considered. So what we're looking at again is condition rating. And we have what's now the depreciation variables are functional limitations and external limitations. And again, I used a 30% condition rating based upon the images I was provided. And in the functional limitations, I had a 10% rating. And that's because this tree was causing damage and really was resulting in a health and safety problem with the walkway and affecting the residents and visitors to the property. So based upon that and the fact that they've replaced the trees, they've planted 2 new trees and a number of shrubs, redone the whole landscape, my valuation for the tree used in the 10th edition is $800. And now there is an alternative approach in the 10th edition, and it's called the functional replacement method, and that's where you're planting new trees to take over the functional application of the tree that was removed. And essentially, they've already complied with that, in that they planted a Japanese maple and a Ceanothus Ray Hartman in standard form. So they've planted 2 replacement trees, and really, in my opinion, that should fulfill the compensate for the removal of that tree. So again, given just looking at the surveyor's opinion of where the tree was, the health of the tree, the very poor placement and the damage it was doing to the walkway, I think the $16,000 value is extreme for that tree. And you need to step back and say, is that reasonable? And that's one of the points. And would you pay $16,000 for that tree as a value? So.
Well, then that's why I'm here.
Pardon me?
Thank you. I have a quick question for you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. I see from the current landscape picture that I believe I see a Japanese maple close to the walkway. Is that right? The red looking tree? Yeah, okay. And pardon if I use the incorrect terms, but not a tree expert. Where are the other 2 trees?
Well, that's one of the trees, the Japanese maple.
Right.
So the other one was a Ceanothus Ray Hartman, which is
Can we have the screen back?
Yes, please.
it's located right here.
Okay.
There's the Japanese maple left, and then all the other shrubs. So in terms of the, I'm the city arborist for Healdsburg, and I deal with heritage tree removals. But when you look at the functional replacement, I think the removal of that tree really has been adequately compensated for already at quite an expense. So this was an unfortunate sequence of events, but I think at this point adding a fine of $16,000 when there's already been replacement trees, the condition of that tree is really questionable, and the fact that it was doing damage to the walkway and stairs and causing that tripping hazard, really diminishes the value of that tree.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other public comment regarding this case? Oh, sorry, this item. I'm not in court. I'm sorry, ma'am? The owner would like to make one remark. Of course. Yes, sir.
I'm Bernard Nebenzahl. My wife and I have lived in this home for 50 years. This tree was a significant tree for us for many years. But over the last several years, it's lifted up the sidewalk. So it was becoming a hazard for us. Both of the designers that we talked with and the landscapers advised us that we need to remove that tree. And there was no good way to do it but taking it out. And so all of this, to me, it results that the fact that it was a significant tree, whether it is or it isn't, is immaterial. It needed to be removed. There was no way of dealing with it otherwise. And I guess that's where we started on all of this, and that's where we are now. And
Can I ask you a quick question then? Just for comparison in my mind, how much was the whole landscape project?
how much was it?
Yeah,
We've spent over $70,000.
$70,000. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty significant amount of.
I mean,
And the whole process took, if we count the time where the permit removal request was first submitted, which I believe it was in August 2018. When did it end?
probably March or April. The reason we did not go with the first contractor was because we were a very small job in their work. And they kept on saying, well, we'll get to it in another month. And then we'll get to it in another month. And, well, I'm not sure. And they were great people and nice to work with, but the job wasn't getting done. And we didn't see a prospect for that. It had started, I'm not sure how many months before, and we'd talked with designers and gone through all kinds of stuff and trying to figure out how to do things.
Well, it really looks like a nice landscape now.
Thank
know?
you. Thank
Looks like
you.
a
Our
good
neighbors are
job.
telling us that too, so it's,
Yeah.
Thank
Did the previous contractor, landscaper, did he mention? Sorry, the previous landscaper, the one that you like.
Rock and Roses, yes.
Rock and Roses, yes. Did he mention the reason for the delay in his work? Or
The delay was just, we were just a small job in their whole group of work they were doing. And they said, we'll come in and do it in a couple of weeks. But they couldn't find the couple of weeks to get their group over there.
And even if they did not receive approval for the tree removal, so
Well,
they wouldn't be able to. Well, actually, let me take that back. They were, according to Buff, they were informally denied the removal.
I didn't, we had, part of our agreement was they said that they may need to get a permit, and we said, fine.
May I add to this? Because this is a really key point. I've spoken with staff at Buff. I spoke with Susan Nauberry. I spoke with the former landscapers, and both confirmed that the email train that I showed you was the last word on it, with Susan Nauberry saying, can you alter the design? The Rock and Rose saying, no, we can't, and here's why, giving her all the details of why there were no viable alternatives, and then never hearing from staff again. And so that former landscaper assumed it was going to be granted. The Nebenzals didn't know about any of this going on, and of course, neither did their new contractor, who made an independent determination that they didn't have to go through the process because it was 12 feet, not knowing that an application had been submitted almost a year prior. So they never got a ruling on the application formally or informally.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you, sir.
When I went down, when we got the notice, I went down to the office, and she told me, or she showed me then the correspondence, when I was blown away. I had no idea that that had gone on. I knew that we'd agreed that if they needed to do it, to go ahead, but I didn't know that there was something going on.
Sure. Understand. Thank you. May I have a question for Buff, please? Or may I have an answer? So, yeah, I was under the impression there was some kind of communication to the effect. I understand the permit was applied for, but never concluded. But I thought there was some kind of communications regarding the, where this permit was going to go, toward approval, toward, rejection. What, am I imagining things? Did that something like that happen?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how did it happen?
I can
if it
go back
didn't?
with the inspector and just confirm, but I believe what happened was it was communication between Rock and Rose and the inspector and not directly to the property owner. So we can understand how things like that can be lost in communication or not communicated. However, I do believe that the inspector told Rock and Rose and made it clear that it was not our position to want to approve the trees for removal. So sometimes we don't want to issue like, official denials if we can work with the property owner to come to a solution. So for instance, I believe that's why she was trying to ask, is there a workaround? Is there something else we could do? After that was explained, like they were explaining, I don't believe a formal denial was issued at that point. However, the application was never fully withdrawn, so there wasn't any closure, and you do technically need a removal permit to remove a tree.
Unless it's outside those measurements.
Yes, unless it's determined to not be significant. However, we believe it was.
So it seems whatever communication happened between DPW, Buff, and the contractor, the landscaper, Rock and Rose, did not make it through the property owner or their agents.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. We had reason to believe that they did communicate based on this email that they sent, which explained that they had discussed with the property owner the reason for filing a permit. That's just from Rock and Rose. Phil sent us that email, so we had reason to believe that they had a discussion about it, and that they did understand what the removal permit was for and why, but can understand how the property owner might not know the exact specifics of why the removal permit was needed.
Okay. And setting that aside, it is the property owner position, or the council position, arborist position, that the tree was not that healthy to begin with. I haven't seen that reflected in Buff appraisal.
Yeah, I need to go back and just double check when the removal permit was submitted, but at the time when it was submitted and the actual evaluation was done, the tree was deemed to be healthy and sustainable. I think here it's probably just a difference of subjectiveness in terms of like what people feel is a hazard. We have a different, perspective of that coming from a city agency as opposed to somebody who lives with the tree in front of their house, every day. So we totally understand the discrepancies in perspective. For us, we did not deem the tree to be hazardous, and we didn't see that the damage to the walkway was extensive enough to warrant the removal of the tree. So that was why the inspector was trying to work for a different solution. So I think it's just a matter of slightly different perspectives on why we chose to not allow the removal.
Okay, and just for my own understanding, actually, I will ask the question to the arborist if I can. Thank you.
Thanks.
It's going to be a really quick question. And it is regarding the condition of the tree, and you mentioned that this tree has something, hold on. I don't want to say it wrong. Scale and trips.
Yes.
Could you expand a little bit on that kind of condition? Infested, so is it bacteria or insects?
Well, it certainly can be, and often insect infestations are an indication that the tree has low energy, so it's not resisting the infestation. But the photographs that the landscape Mr. Lannon provided shows very severe infestation. And looking at the tree from the photos that we have from distance, you can see that the crown's thinning. And I've actually had lived with an old English holly, so I'm familiar with these issues. And originally they really were planted as shrubs, and this just eventually grew into a tree form essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But there's the thrips damage.
And trips are again.
It's an insect.
It's an
So they
insect.
feed on the underside of the leaves, and they cause that necrotic response in the tree. And then, and the tree, structurally, those are two codominant trunks.
Right.
So, you can, that was originally topped there probably,
Right.
when it was being maintained as a shrub.
Oh, so this is what the picture is showing, the codominant.
Codominant
Yeah, yeah.
trunks, yeah.
All right,
yeah.
thank you.
Now, for a tree like this, not that significant because it's not growing, so it's not going to, it wasn't that big in terms of, it had a large trunk diameter because of its age, but you can tell it had been historically pruned to keep it confined. And
Sorry, so what does this picture show?
That was a scale,
Oh, scale,
yes.
which is again insect?
And the thrips.
Okay.
The other thing I'd like to mention, when we talk about impacts of putting in infrastructure, in this case a new stairs and walkway, one way we assess the risk to the tree for that work is the distance of the work from the base of the tree. So we have what's called a critical root zone, and that's typically 3 times the trunk diameter. And if you're doing work in there, and if you take out structural roots, you really increase the risk of that tree toppling due to loss of anchorage, as well as impact to the health of the tree further. So what the landscape designer was identifying really was, if you put in this pathway and take out these roots that are causing the displacement, and the tree's already in poor condition, it's not likely to tolerate it. And so that's what drove the whole decision to remove the tree. And I think it was a reasonable one given this situation.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other public comment, either from protester or city agency? Very well. I will close this item, and with this, the hearing. Thank you very much.